Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a little bit of a different video for me. I think I got this idea from Jess. I think she did a video kind of similar to this recently, but I'm breaking this up into two different parts. So today's video, I'm going to be talking about romance novels that I love that I never talk about. So these are books that I mentioned in one wrap-up and then I haven't talked about them since. But I love them all and I still highly recommend them. They just haven't been featured in any of my like underrated recommendations videos or any other videos like that. So I thought today would be the perfect time to talk about these books. So first things first, we have a darker new adult romance that is Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. Now, Penelope Douglas has been a little bit of a hit or miss author for me. I read Birthday Girl by her a year or so ago. I liked it. I didn't love it as much as everybody else did. I wasn't as invested in the romance between the two main characters in that book. So going into Punk 57, I didn't even have a physical copy before I read it because I didn't think I was going to love it all that much. But I have to say I was very pleasantly surprised by this book and I had to get myself a copy. It was just that amazing. So if you don't know what this is about, I mean, this is a pretty popular book at this point, but it's about our two main characters, Misha and Ryan. They meet when they're in 5th grade, I think. They are pen pals. And then something happens where I think Misha stops writing to Ryan. One of them stops responding to the letters. And so then years later, now they're in high school, the two of them are reunited, though Ryan, our heroine, does not know that Misha is the guy that she wrote letters to way back when. It's a little bit of a bully romance because Misha just has a lot of anger and he takes it out on Ryan. But what I loved about this is that Ryan dishes it just as much as she takes it, for sure. She doesn't let him get away with his bullshit by any means. Both of these characters were just so interesting to me. Misha in particular was just very magnetic. And Ryan, I loved that she wasn't the most likable heroine, but by the end of the book, you are fully invested in her and her story and you're rooting for the both of them. Also, I do want to mention that this book gets very, very steamy and it is about two 18-year-olds. I know some people are wary about steamy books about teenagers, but in my mind, they're both consenting adults, so it's fine. But yes, highly recommend. This book makes me want to read more from Penelope Douglas, but I'm not quite sure which of her books I want to go with because I feel like Credence sounds like it's going to be too much for me. I might try Misconduct. There's a couple of other books that interest me from her, but some of her other books not so much. So yes, highly, highly recommend this one, especially if you are just now getting into some darker new adult romances. Next book I want to discuss is Brooklyn Air by Serena Bowen. This is the first book by Serena Bowen that I've ever read. I have read a book that she's written with Elle Kennedy, which is also on this list, but after reading this book, I just need to read more from her because I can tell that she's going to be one of my favorite romance authors. I just loved this so much. This is an amazing friends to lovers romance, and we have Nate, who is a nerdy hero. He's been pining for Becca for years at this point. If you love a pining hero, this is the book for you. I got this recommendation from Bree from 11 Words. This is one of her, I think, all-time favorites at this point as well, and for very good reason. This is also kind of a hockey romance because Nate owns a hockey team, and there are more books in this series. It's a companion romance series. I haven't read the other books yet, but this one was pretty fantastic. I just adored Nate so much, and I really liked Becca as the heroine as well. Next is the perfect historical romance for you if you are looking for a low angst romance, and sometimes that is what I'm in the mood for. I don't always want to read the most dramatic romances, so this one was just perfect for me at the time that I read it, and that is The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. This was also my first Courtney Milan novel, and I definitely need to read more from her. I've read one of her novellas as well. Yeah, I just need to read more because she has quite the historical romance backlist for sure. But this one is book 1 in her newest series, I believe, and we are following Jeremy, who is a duke who does nothing with his title, which is why he's called the Duke Who Didn't. And then we have Chloe, who is our heroine. She is a meticulous list maker. This is definitely an opposites attract romance. I wouldn't call it Grump Sunshine because I don't think that Chloe is particularly grumpy at all. Yeah, this was just such a sweet romance, and Jeremy was so freaking funny. Like, I chuckled out loud quite a few times while reading this, which doesn't always happen when I'm reading comedic books. Also, Jeremy is a virgin hero. Just wanted to mention that as well. Just wanted to mention that as well because I know that there are readers such as myself that adore that trope, and I just feel like there aren't enough of those romances out there. Next is another historical romance. This is Bewitching by Jill Barnett. This is a recommendation that I got from Jen from the book Refuge, and this is interesting because it's a historical romance with fantastical elements thrown in. So we have our heroine Joyous. She is a witch, and she does this spell to teleport herself somewhere else. I can't remember the specifics of why she had to travel, but she ends up teleporting herself right on top of Alec, who is a duke. Like, she literally just falls on top of him, and it goes on from there. This is very much the Regency era version of the show Bewitched, and it's really adorable at times. I will say this is a pretty long historical romance. I think it was about like 450 pages, which is a bit too long in my opinion for a historical romance, but there were a lot of great things going on in the story, and I was engaged the entire time. Like I said, it brings something different to the genre in my opinion, and for an older school romance, this was written in like 1993, there wasn't anything problematic in terms of consent or anything like that that I noticed. Next up, we have Her Night with the Duke by Diana Quincy. This is book 1 in a new series by her. I think this is Diana Quincy's debut, if I'm not mistaken, but this one is about Leela. She is a widow at this point, and then we have Hunt, who is a duke, and so they meet at an inn and they have a one-night stand together, but little do they realize that Hunt is the duke that is courting Leela's stepdaughter, because Leela married a man who was like twice her age, and so his daughter is only like a few years younger than Leela. So yeah, definitely a forbidden romance going on for sure. I could really feel the chemistry between Leela and Hunt from page 1. You could just tell that they had this connection with one another, and it was believable to me that they would have this one-night stand at the very beginning of the novel. And I'm also really excited for book 2 in this series. I can't remember what it's called, but it's coming out in just a few months, and I actually got an e-arc of it off of NetGalley, so I definitely need to try to get to that e-arc very soon. Next up, we have a paranormal romance that everybody loves, and I love for very good reason. This is Lover Awakened by J.R. Ward. This is book 3 in her Black Dagger Brotherhood series. So this one is about Zadist, who is definitely a very broken hero. By the way, this is a series all about this group of vampires that are the protector of the vampire race, and they have to fight against these beings known as lessers, which are humans who were made into immortal beings, whereas vampires were born to be vampires. And the lessers are trying to eliminate the vampire race by any means possible. And so this romance is about Zadist. Like I said, he's a very broken hero. He was a blood slave earlier in his life, and then we have Bella, who is another vampire, and I just adored this so much. To me, this book really stepped up the series as a whole, and it's kind of funny too, because while I was reading this book, I told myself that I was just gonna stop with the series after this one because this is everyone's favorite, but there's kind of a cliffhanger at the end of this one, and I'm just so enthralled with the characters and the world that I need to know what happens next, so I'm definitely planning on at least reading the next few books in this series. Next up is a gothic romance novella that totally blew me away. I didn't know what I was getting into when I started this book, but it was absolutely incredible, and that is The Headmaster by Tiffany Rice. Now, Tiffany Rice is an author that I have read quite a few books from at this point, and I knew that I enjoyed her writing for sure, but to me, this novella was on another level entirely. So we have our main character is Gwen. She stumbles upon this small town where there's this mysterious private school, I think for young boys only. I don't remember it being co-ed. And then we have Edwin, who's the headmaster at this school, and so she ends up getting a teaching job. I think she's an English teacher, and so it's a romance between the two of them, kind of forbidden given that he's her boss. But this was absolutely fantastic. This goes in a direction that you will not predict, and by the end I was just like dying inside. I'm pretty sure I cried while reading the end. It's just absolutely stunning and typical with Tiffany Rice. Great sex scenes as well. Next up we have The Beast of Bozick by Amelie Howard. So this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, told in the Regency era, another historical romance, but to me, this does offer something different in terms of being a Beauty and the Beast retelling. I think we've all read so many of those retellings at this point that in order for one of them to stand out, they really do have to bring something different to the table, and I totally think that this one does. So we have Lord Nathaniel. He's definitely a very beastly character. Not only that he's very, very scarred, I think from war, if I'm not mistaken, but also he treats his servants just terribly. Yeah, nobody wants to be his friend by any means. But Astrid comes into his life because I think he sets his sights on courting her younger sister. And so she's like, hell no, you're gonna have me instead, because she wants to save her sister from the fate of being with him. And it goes on from there. The chemistry between these two characters was amazing. The smut was great as well. I also liked that Astrid also kind of had some beastly qualities. That's how it's worded throughout the novel, because she's just very guarded and serious after she was ruined by this terrible man when she was 16. So yes, this is one of those Beauty and the Beast retellings that I think you really should give a shot. Next is a really fun premise for sure, and that is Smut by Karina Halley. Karina Halley is quickly becoming one of my absolute favorite romance authors. I never talk about this book because it's not one of my absolute favorites by her, but I still had a really fun time listening to the audiobook for this while I was driving around. But the premise is we have our main characters, Amanda and Blake. They are in a creative writing course together in college. Blake definitely gets on Amanda's nerves, and it turns out that they have to write a novel together for this class. So the writing project goes really well, and they decide that they want to keep writing together, and they discover that erotica authors on Amazon are actually making a pretty penny. It's actually a very lucrative business to get into, especially if you are only publishing the books as ebooks and you're not worrying about printing them as physical copies or anything like that. So yeah, they start writing erotica together and a romance ensues. There's a couple of scenes in this book that live in my head rent-free. There's an especially steamy scene that takes place in a library. So yeah, highly recommend this one if you're looking for a fun, smutty romance. Next romance I want to bring up is Him by Elle Kennedy and Serena Bowen. Serena Bowen I brought up earlier when I talked about Brooklyn Air, but this is a male-male hockey romance. It's also a childhood friends to lovers romance. This is the book that made me realize that I really do enjoy male-male romances. I do sometimes worry going into these books that the authors are fetishizing gay men, but in this case it really was just beautifully written in my opinion. I really enjoyed both Wes and Jamie's characters. Definitely a very angsty and emotional time. Be ready for that going into this one. But also just such a beautiful story and a fantastic hockey romance as well. Next up we have Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. This is book 2 in her Hot and Hammered series, though this is a companion romance series, so you can definitely read this as a standalone. So this is the marriage in trouble trope, my absolute favorite romance trope, and it was just beautifully done in this book. I will say, I know a lot of people didn't really like this book, and I think it's because this book is a lot more serious than people think it's going to be, because when you look at this cover, it's a cartoony kind of cover. You're gonna assume that's gonna be more of a rom-com, but it's really not. It's definitely a much more serious book than that. We are following our two main characters, Rosie and Dominic. They have been married for years, and at this point, Dominic, like, never really talks to Rosie ever. The only time they actually communicate is when they have sex, like, once a week, I think. Finally, Rosie just has enough of Dominic not emotionally being there for her, and so she leaves him. He realizes that he really needs to change something because he loves her so much. He doesn't want to lose her. And so they end up going to therapy together, and it's just a fantastic story. There are some lighter moments, but definitely this is a more serious book. Also, Tessa Bailey really goes there with the smut and dirty talk and all of those things. So if you're not into that, maybe stay away. But if you are into that, this is going to be a great pick for you. And last but certainly not least, we have have What You Wish For by Catherine Center. So this is a women's fiction novel. Women's fiction is a genre that's not typically for me because usually the romances in these books are not the central part of the story. These stories are more about the main character and their development as a person. But there's something about Catherine Center, her writing, the stories that she tells that I really love. I've also read Things You Save in a Fire by her, and I absolutely adored that book, and I've talked about that book for sure. But this one I think I've only mentioned in a wrap-up before, but I loved this almost just as much as Things You Save in a Fire. We're following our main characters, Sam and Duncan. So Sam works at this elementary school and Duncan comes in as the new principal. They actually have a little bit of a history because they worked at another elementary school together years earlier. Duncan, first of all, was a very different person back then. He was very fun-loving and just silly. But back then, Sam was also a very different person. She was very invisible and just like very quiet. Now in present day, these two people have flip-flopped. Duncan is now a very serious and straight-laced person, shows little to no emotion for sure. But Sam now wears bright colors and is definitely a very sunshiny character. So it's a little bit of a grump sunshine trope. I don't think that Duncan is too grumpy, but he's definitely very straight-laced. We do learn throughout this book that the reason why Duncan changed so much is that he went through a school shooting. He was actually shot by the shooter, and he still very much has a lot of PTSD from that incident. I did want to bring that up for you as a possible content warning, but I thought that this was absolutely fantastic. I will say the romance in this one is more central in this book than in Things You Save in a Fire, because in that book there's more things going on with the main character and the relationship with her mother and things like that, whereas in this book it definitely is all about the romance. Fun fact as well, Duncan is based on Catherine's husband, which I thought was really sweet. So yes, I definitely wholeheartedly recommend this. All right guys, that's going to be it for romance novels that I adore that I never talk about. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!